Professor, thank you for visiting our university and giving us your lecture. So let me ask you two theoretical questions. The first one will be based on Thomas Kuhn's logic about paradigms and crises in them. So how can we understand that realist paradigm is still a developing one and it is able to elucidate properly the current events and states of affairs, international relations, but not a stagnating one that is working only on justifying, defending itself from the criticism on, for example, constructivists or postmodernists who proposed new variables and proposed using multi-causal synthesis for explaining international relations, or neoclassical liberals who have an amalgam of approaches that are quite flexible in illuminating processes in our world. And the second one.
No, you could only ask one at a time. I could never remember everything. I have limited storage capacity. You can ask the second question, but first I got to answer that question. Just a couple points. One is, first of all, a lot of these multi-causal stories and classical realism fits in that category. They're not theories because they're not simplifications of reality, right? What do the classical realists tell you? That it's not only structure that matters, John. Domestic variables matter. This domestic variable matters, that domestic variable matters, that domestic variable matters. Thanks a lot. In the end, everything matters, right? The question is how much? And as I said to you before, a good theory is a simplification of reality. And once you start throwing in every other variable that you can think up, right, it just stops becoming a theory and it becomes a description. And this is my problem with classical realism. I don't think it's a theory. It just says domestic politics matters and international politics matters. Just to give you an example, the argument that's used against me whenever I give this talk, time after time, is economic interdependence theory. And this gentleman over here hinted at that. I just didn't have enough time to address it. When I go to China, the argument that's used against me, it's not defensive realism, right? It's not nuclear weapons, which is the argument I'd use against me, right? It's not democratic peace theory. It's economic interdependence theory. Simple argument. China's neighbors, the United States, are all hooked on capitalism. They're all economically interdependent. Everybody's getting rich. And who in their right mind would kill the goose that lays the golden eggs by starting a war? So economic considerations will trump security considerations in the end. I think this is wrong, but it's an elegant theory. It's a simple theory, unlike classical realism and these multivariable theories that people are throwing around. Just a quick point about Thomas Kuhn. Look, theories are never finished. 50 years from now, you won't be sitting here, but successor generations will be sitting here. I won't be here. I'll be long put in the ground, right? But somebody will be up here lecturing on what is a hot IR theory, and it won't be my theory. It'll be a different theory. Theories evolve over time. Theories are never once and for all. So what we have here is a world in where people are constantly trying to refine existing theories and come up with new theories. And because theories are never completely right, as I told you, I think my theory gets it right 75% of the time. It means it's wrong 25% of the time. Others are going to try and come up with a theory that gets it right almost all the time. And this is a really good thing. And it's just the nature of the enterprise.
So in the second question, don't you consider that you as a respected expert and distinguished expert in international relations and wide academic communities can more or less have an influence on knowledge production and by doing so control and determine policymaker learning, that therefore change state interest and hence make them be dynamic and be of non-systemic structural origin? Thank you.
Yeah. This is a great question. It sort of gets at the when question. And the basic argument here is that ideas really matter. And I have ideas and other scholars have ideas. And can't we come up with ideas that change how policymakers think? Right? This is a very Wendtian view of international politics. Because as you know, Alex and other social constructivists believe that discourse matters. And they believe that scholars who help shape that discourse can change the discourse in ways that facilitate more peaceful relations among states. I, of course, think that scholars matter, but not very much. You understand that? I think the structure of the system forces states to behave in particular ways. I tried to make this point clear in the beginning of my talk. I once had a conversation with Alex Wendt when he was my colleague on this very issue. And I told him that I said, Alex, I think you're really bothered by the fact that I go before large audiences like this, and I make these presentations, and I pollute the brains of young people. I make you think in realist terms, which leads to a more competitive world than otherwise would be the case. And I think that for people like Alex, it would be much better if it was people like himself and people who had a more peaceful and cooperative story to tell who could get up in front of audiences, and you could limit people like me from influencing the likes of you. And I said, but the truth is, I don't think it matters whether I speak to students or not, because those students, once they become policymakers, will behave like good realists anyway, because you'll quickly figure out what the structure dictates, and you'll act accordingly. So I am ultimately a structural realist of the first order. Yes? And if people would just identify themselves, stand up and identify yourself, and make sure you talk into the microphone so everybody can hear you.
Thank you for such thought-provoking speech. My question is rather theoretical. Why are intentions of leaders are so important, since it's the structure of the international system that shapes the behavior of states?
Okay. Did everybody hear the question? Yes. Okay. A structural theory can focus on individuals, as this young woman indicated, and it can focus on particular states, okay, as long as the assumption about that individual, or those individuals, or the assumption about states applies to all states, or all individuals. Okay? In other words, if I said you could not be certain about the intentions of authoritarian leaders, but you could be certain about the intentions of democratic leaders, that would not be structural, because you're discriminating inside the black box or among individuals. But if you simply say, I am assuming that you cannot be certain about the intentions of any other individual or any other leader, then it's completely consistent with a structural theory. Let me give you another example. Some people have asked your question in a slightly different way. They've said, John, you say this is a structural theory, but you're talking about survival as the principal goal of all states. You're looking at leaders and you're saying their goal is survival. How can that be structural? You're focusing on the leaders of states. And my answer is, it can be structural as long as you assume that every unit in the structure is making the same assumption. Okay? So that's how